men, I think we know, are more likely to be violent, but that doesn't prevent women having their own special way of being unkind to each other and to other people and to their own men, and to using their power through men to hurt other people. I mean, women are no better or worse than men. True feminism to me would be working out how their very best instincts and their happiest way of being with their child is going to be facilitated. That seems like the best form of feminism, rather than asking whether or not they've reached the board of a FTSE 100 or something. I mean, it seems like the least interesting dynamic for a woman to me.
Hi, Claire.
Hello. Hi, Tammy.
I'm going to just do a quick introduction so people have a clue of who you are and why I invited you on. So Claire is a mother, a writer, a researcher, and a political consultant who's been campaigning for impartiality, accuracy, and transparency in British education after bringing a landmark Freedom of Information case. So we'll be talking a bit about that. She took legal action hoping to establish that commercial secrecy should not take precedence over parental interest to have access to their children's learning resources. So that's an ongoing process, I believe. She's also the author of a report commissioned by Miriam Cates MP, who spoke at the ARC conference and did a very nice job of speaking, I must say. It's published by the New Social Covenant Unit that cast light upon serious problems within the implementation of British relationships and sex education. That's RSC curriculum. This contributed to the Prime Minister's recent intervention to bring forward an RSC review. And in her past career, she was an award-winning designer in partnership, which produced art and design works for international clients, including fashion and furniture brands, in galleries, museums, a number of them in the British Isles. And so you've made like many people, I think, in this day and age, you've made quite a change.
I have.
You're doing something that's like, what am I doing here? And why am I doing it? And it's for our children. And
True.
That can't wait, right?
Absolutely that. I felt in a way blown off path, but actually it's turned out, I think, to be something actually more important and more rewarding, actually, to do. So, yeah.
In what way do you find that more important and more rewarding?
Well, I think working with art and design when you're young is an enormous amount of fun and interesting. And because I think perhaps when you're younger, you're interested in finding out where beauty lies and what fashion means, what the dialogue of humans is, the kind of visual dialogue that's going on. And I found that all very fascinating as a young person. But since I've had children, I've had less of a desire to play with that world and explore it, and much more interest in, I guess, slightly deeper issues, and also in politics, in what the future will be like for my kids and my grandkids, I guess, one day, I hope. And yeah, that has taken my interest more deeply, I think.
Well, my kids are grown, but I have grandkids, and I'm quite concerned, especially the kids that are in Canada, because the education system there is very woke, and the teacher training is also, suspicious. I'm suspicious of that. So I'm very interested in what you went through and what brought you to the needing to take a stand, and what that stand was.
Yeah, so I think things are similar here to Canada and the US, perhaps a little behind, but nevertheless the same pattern. And fundamentally, I saw lessons cropping up from quite a long while ago, actually, which I would describe as indoctrination and not education. And by that, I mean simply telling the children what to think on contentious political issues, social justice issues, they're commonly called now, particularly on gender and race, but other things too, from climate and, a socialist outlook. And that was being passed on to the children with increasing confidence that this was the right thing to do and there was no alternative opinion. So I had some fears about that. And then when I actually, my daughter, eldest daughter, got to secondary school, and there she was delivered a lesson which is part of a new curriculum. It's called Relationships and Sex Education here. But I think probably internationally it's more commonly called Comprehensive Sexuality Education. It's a similar sort of framework. And it was new to the UK. And so she was taught a lesson which included elements, I think, of queer theory, of discussion of heteronormativity being a very bad thing, the need to live a sex-positive life, ideas which are, highly contentious. I therefore thought it would be a good idea to see that lesson and maybe perhaps to raise a formal complaint, which is a right we have, in the state school sector. And I was told I couldn't see that lesson. I couldn't see the resources. I then made the mistake of calling the charity which delivers those resources, and they reported me to the school as being an anti-LGBTQ plus harasser for making such sort of inquiries and suggesting there was something wrong with this education. So that led me to make a Freedom of Information request, which is, a facility that I think is the same possibly in the US. I don't know about Canada, but I can ask to see something that the state has paid for and produced. And I was denied that by, firstly, the school, then denied it by the Information Commissioner, which is our body which oversees how free information should be. And then I was also denied it in a court case by a judge. And interestingly, all the way through, the ICO, the Information Commissioner, and the judge all took a look at this lesson plan, but I couldn't see it. And they all made their opinions about it, but the parent can't. So yes, I mean, there's a little more complexity to it in the sense that there was an offer for me to go and see it if I was to keep a secret about it, or if I were to mind the secret copyright in some way. And of course, I wasn't prepared to do that. I'm not going to bind myself to the secrecy of a company that wants to teach my daughter. I think that if you teach other people's children, you need to be prepared to tell everybody what you teach. So that's the point I've got to, and I will be making another legal appeal because I can go to a higher court to try again, which I will do.
And when do you foresee that coming about?
Well, it should be. I mean, I've been waiting a few months now since lodging the appeal, and I should be hearing any minute, and then maybe have to wait another month or two for a court case slot.
So what do your children think about all of this?
Well, I actually had to move my eldest when I was called a harasser by the LGBT kind of company, well, the charity that was concerned about LGBT rights. The school chose to back them. And at that point, your relationship with the school is over. I mean, this school prefers to mind its politics than to care about the relationship with the family that's attending the school. And, it became impossible. So my daughter had to move school. And obviously, that wasn't nice. And I was asking something of her. Making that complaint, I think, it brought some issues to her directly through friends and teachers that weren't very careful. And, so I think at the time, she possibly thought, why is my mum making such a headache here? I mean, she understood, but nevertheless, naturally, the most important thing is being in with your friends. But actually looking back now and having seen the dialogue open up in this country, having seen the Prime Minister actually step in and talk about whether transparency in schools is a problem now and we need something done. I think she's immensely proud, actually, or just glad that can be done by an individual, and that role did need doing. And but it's been challenging.
See, that's very interesting that you say that, because lots of people, they send their kid to the neighborhood school and they think, oh, it's close, it's really, that's handy. And for us and for the child, it's handy. And other friends are there. And so it's a good atmosphere because they'll have these friends and play dates afterwards and whatever. But there's one thing at school that we don't agree with, but it's just one thing. And maybe we can put up with that because everything else is so good. So we'll just send our kids to that and not say anything. And then it continues. It continues, that thing that they don't like spreads and continues until parents say, wait a minute. And that's uncomfortable. Like you said, it's uncomfortable, but you've seen the whole thing, the time where it was uncomfortable and your daughter was maybe going, what are you doing, Mom? My friends are asking me questions. I'm like, my teachers are questioning me. What are you doing? But now she's seen that and she's going, oh, speaking up for what you believe in. Ooh, that's important. And our kids need to know that.
Exactly. There's, is there anything better you can demonstrate to them, really, as long as you're working constructively? Is there anything better? And actually, for me, that's the first education, and we are the first educators. The parents are the chief educators of our kids. We are the ones, I think, who pass on the fullest sense of our culture and meaning. And there can be wonderful teachers in a school. But a school is also an institution, and it can develop institutional biases. It can be, it can be swayed by unions. It can be it can be short of money. There are all sorts of ways in which a school might fail, and we, the parents, have to be able to step forward and speak up about that. And actually, what I'd really like to see is a better collaboration between parents and teachers on this. We need to kind of get the balance redrawn, where we have constructive conversations. Parents, are respectful about the way they raise their queries, but the schools do actually listen. And we start to kind of untangle what has, I think, got into... certainly I look across at the US and see a mess of poor relationships between parents and teachers that's being imported here to some extent. We need to get back to defining what is impartial, open-minded education, what's properly liberal and pluralistic in the classical sense, rather than what I'm seeing happening, which is an indoctrination of a singular moral viewpoint.
And I think in Britain, as you say, it's becoming apparent that that's happening. But in the US and Canada, I wouldn't say it's across the board, because I'm sure that there are, and I've been to one or two schools that I thought were still doing a good job of educating our children, but it's not very likely anymore, partly because the universities are teaching our teachers, and they're indoctrinating the young people who go to university. So then that is what they're going to be teaching. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how long that's been going on, but I took an education course at university back in the 80s, and it was already starting to turn to a politically correct agenda. So I don't know how far it's gone now, but even when my kids were young and now they're 30, there were things we were questioning, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I felt alert to this was the fact that I studied a fine art degree, and the art schools, certainly in the UK, have been one of the greatest engines of this. So I received a kind of a really good education in neo-Marxism. I mean, I read it all, and in so kind of from intersectional feminism to kind of from Foucault, all the French thinkers. I kind of had a pretty allergic reaction to it at the time, and felt... Why did I have an allergic reaction? Because, fundamentally, I think it went against all the things that my parents had brought me up to think about. I think it went against a lot of my instincts as a woman, particularly, actually. I didn't find I don't find feminist literature and thought very helpful very often. I tend to find it actually goes against kind of my instincts and way of being. And so that kind of was in the back of my mind when seeing it arrive into schools, I recognized this theory. I recognized the gender theory and I recognized the socialist theory and felt, actually this is something it's a very adult and demanding subject to begin with. It doesn't really belong with children. This is not where you begin your basis of thought. It's a very sophisticated set of arguments, actually. And so I realized that was a worry in a way. But yes, I mean, that was back in the 90s here. And so certainly universities were already kind of dealing with this subject in an intolerant way. I mean, this is the fundamental part. Nobody minds a theorist being brought into the room. It's the intolerance of the counter theory. It's the animosity against all of the things that have been taught before. That is what I object to, and that's what I found actually.
So what did you see in terms of animosity and pushback against what you were saying?
Fundamentally, that I think the key point is that the relativism that was the basis of what we could loosely call neo-Marxist literature, the kind of relativism of that refused the idea that there could be one truth. It refused the idea that people could meet together on that truth. In fact, it insisted that we all had our own independent identity that was sort of isolated, that was made up of various very shallow factors from our skin color to our sex. And it insisted that we occupy the world in that way. And so, religious thought can't fit with that. In fact, many philosophical positions can't fit with that. It was unfashionable to hold the view that we didn't live in a set of relativist truths and a very sort of solipsistic and existential world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder what it is about this ideology that makes it so. I know it's divisive. It divides people, but it divides people in a very emotional manner, right?
Mm.
Yeah, the emotions run high all the time.
Especially because you are invited to focus on your identity traits as your very being. So you're bringing your inner self right to your skin. You're bringing your inner self to your genitalia. You're bringing your inner self to all of these markers that actually, they're part of you and they're crucial, but they are not everything, and they don't shape your full experience by any means. And so it's asking it's creating almost a disassociation, I believe, between mind and body and what you believe. And I think it's a very thin philosophy. I think it's based on quite a lot of writers actually involved in it. When you look at their whole purpose, I think their purpose was very often quite selfish. I think they had itches of their own they needed to scratch, and they created the world in the way that permitted them to explore their needs. I think that's we need to get past that into deeper philosophical waters and understand that that's necessary when you teach children. You need to have a really good, sound philosophy to teach everyone else's children.
That's for sure. The whole history of feminism too is, as I've learned, because I never studied it in university, but I've studied it recently. So as I've learned, comes from a place of certain people working through their own troubles through writing and speaking and finding their way to what they thought was a way of understanding, brought resentment into the narrative of feminism. And I'm going to be talking to a woman actually who came to the ARC. She's very elderly. She was in a wheelchair when she was there. Her name is Erin Pizzey, Pizzey, and she started the first women's refuges for people who were, and not just for women, anyone who was abused. She offered them a place of sanctuary long ago, like long ago, and the feminists didn't want her narrative to be the narrative because it wasn't just male patriarchy, right? Because they had a bone to pick with men, because these are women maybe who maybe didn't have a good male at home, and then thought all men were like that, and so that's the narrative we've been left
Yeah.
with. And this LGBTQ, like that is so, it's so simple, basic sex, and whether you're a girl or a boy, man, there's nothing more basic than that. And to have children making those decisions has to be destabilizing right from their core.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I think feminism has a huge amount to answer for, because I think of it as the original gender theory, actually. I think it's when a certain class of women were able to indulge in breaking down stereotypes for themselves, which I'm sure was emancipating and interesting for what they could do and afford.
Mm-hmm.
But the stereotypes they were breaking down were things which women of poorer situations might have needed. And I think stereotypes, that the attack on gender stereotypes is really foolish. I mean, societies build up collective wisdom to iron out the things that go wrong. And stereotypes are one way of understanding things that, in simple terms, on class level, that actually gives us some indicators that we need. So I think the breaking down of that as a good in itself, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't always question what's right for you and how what's fair, but I am thinking that the breaking down of it for the sake of it, because a gender stereotype is automatically a bad thing, is a foolish thought. Lots of behaviours that we ascribe, men, I think we know are more likely to be violent, but that doesn't prevent women having their own special way of being unkind to each other and to other people and to their own men, and to using their power through men to hurt other people. I mean, women are no better or worse than men. And
Mm-hmm.
the feminist narrative that somehow men are toxic, women are vulnerable, we will never achieve our equality and are not treated right, I find an absurdity, actually. It's false. It's just false. We're half of the population. The population doesn't, renew unless we make a pact with our men. And
That's right.
At an individual level, but we also have to do it at a cultural level. And perhaps, possibly, because the West has been such a long while since it was threatened by war on its own shores, we've forgotten a little bit what that pact is with our men, who would almost undoubtedly defend us collectively at their cost. And we also don't see the same working class effort that once went into being down a coal mine in quite the same way, the risks that men took with their lives to work, the backbreaking work, we don't see that. And so we've kind of made new paxes that are, I think, can be quite selfish on the part of women, actually.
Yeah, that sounds like a fair analysis of things. So our children, that's the other thing, is how many parents are involved in their children's education now, because women and men are both working. And fair enough, I understand that we have our own interests and needs to pay the bills and all of that, but at the cost of our children. So having the parents both go out and work leaves the kids to be minded by their teachers and their schools. And I wonder if, because the parents haven't been there, if the teachers have gone astray without being minded by the parents who have the this is necessary and really important to parents. So it's not like they were casually paying attention. They, parents were involved in the school because the children were important, especially to mothers, important to mothers, because this was this is what we did in our lives, is we had kids and we brought them up. We took care of the household and we brought up our kids, and we made sure that they were going to turn into respectful and flourishing individuals. But now the women have gone out into the workforce, and so what's going on at the schools? Well, let's take a look and see what's going on at the schools. Are we interested anymore? That means, are we interested in our children?
Yeah, I agree. I think there is I see fashion, a sort of fashion amongst especially quite well-to-do London women, that somehow too much attention is not a good thing. Or that, this is something to be done by the school and you don't make a fuss. And it blows my mind. I mean, this is their one upbringing. This is the one moment. It's the most special thing that I think I've done in my life. I can't imagine wanting to farm it out to anyone else, and I can't imagine doing anything more important. It's not that I don't enjoy other things, but it seems to me like it should be a priority. And I think there is something. I think lots of forces are asking. I think a lot of people know that instinctively. But forces are asking us to override that feeling. Commercial forces mainly. I've been reading documents where you can see commercial forces looking into how they can sort of provide services to the daycare centres, to the nurseries, to the really young centres. And also the government, I think, is tempted as well to see an opportunity first to have the women in the market, of course, working and producing, but also to standardise childcare so that it can take control of, expensive social problems. And so maybe the state has gained this arrogance that it can do a better job than parents as well. And of course it probably can when the parents are perhaps poor and stretched and on double wages and all hours working. So we've got this vicious circle going on that's undermining motherhood, I think. Which is a huge tragedy, because I'm fairly sure that so many of the mental health issues we're seeing amongst children will be attributable to the missing parts of motherhood that are happening at the moment.
And there is a place for children to be taken care of by someone other than the mom and the dad, which historically was the grandmother or a sibling or an older sibling when we had more kids, because we used to have larger families. And so then there would be no necessity to take them out of the home and have them go somewhere else to learn. But now we have, and a funny statistic is when they decided to bring in car seats in cars for children, you can fit 2 car seats in the back seat of a car. So why do parents only have 2? Why do parents wonder if they should have that third child again? Well, they'll have to buy a bigger car. And lots of people can't afford it. So the number of kids who've been saved by car seats were fewer than the number of children who have not been born because people wouldn't buy a bigger car. So we don't know, like, it's not like all this stuff is nefarious. Oh, we got to keep our kids safe. I remember when I was a kid, I had a great time in the car because I used to spend all my time with my binoculars looking out the back window backwards in the back of the car, looking at whatever was around, and now kids they're in this seat, and who knows if they can even see because the big seat is right in front of them. So maybe they can see out the side. So kids have been, okay, we're keeping our kids safe. Okay, we're keeping our kids safe. Now we're sending them to school. Oh yeah, that's good. Because, once they get there and they shut that door, they're safe in that school. They're safe in that school. So then we can go off and do whatever we want and come back and get them later. And everybody's happy. But there's payoffs. There's always payoffs.
Yes. Yeah. And we, I think for some reason we don't seem to ask about, or we don't seem to account for really important factors, that kind of, as you say, risk, the emotional development, the bonds, the non-quantifiable things, the things that the market doesn't know how to put a number on. All of those things get ironed out, I think. And really it has to be, I think, women and mothers who ask for them to be counted. And remember what we're losing here. It's about also having the choice to be able to do it the way that you want to do it as well, and although having said that, I mean, I took a big income hit. I sacrificed that happily
So
to
did
be
I.
at home, and couldn't think differently after having had the child. And I just like all of those women who find themselves in that moment. True feminism to me would be working out how their very best instincts and their happiest way of being with their child is going to be facilitated. That seems like the best form of feminism, rather than asking whether or not they've reached the board of a FTSE 100 or something. I mean, seems like the least interesting dynamic for a woman to me.
Because when it comes down to it, for Jordan and I, no matter what we're doing, when it comes down to it, our association with our families is number one. And so you think no matter what you do in your life, when it really comes down to it, you don't miss your work, you miss your children, you miss your grandchildren when you don't see them. And you can say that what you're doing is important and you can do it, but then at least there's an idea of balance, to try to always be striving to balance that time, not celebrating the fact that you're not there, because I don't think anybody celebrates the fact that they're not there, not really.
Yes,
if they do, then they got to wonder what narrative are they listening to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure everyone has a different way of going about it, and maybe some people, some lines of families are quite distant one to the other, and that's how they were brought up, and they somehow come through in that way. I mean, it's not about necessarily everybody doing it the same way, but I think it's fair to say that as a societal shift, we're placing an unfair pressure on motherhood, one way or the other,
and on our children, in consequence, and on our children, right? And what's coming out with children, to have these gender surgeries and hormones, this is a big price to pay for someone feeling not confident in their really deep down, they're not feeling confident. And why is that happening?
Yes, I think mothers have an enormous role to play in that as well, in terms of understanding why their child might be feeling that way and being present to help them with that. But I think what perhaps we have to look at the forces that are asking that to happen, and wondering what they have against our natural bodies, against motherhood, against so much of what I see in the detail of the academia that I read, because I do a lot of research to try and understand where these indoctrinating trends are coming from, and it's such a grand mix of both misguided, well-meaning intentions to try and ask, to make children free in some sort of utopian way, and then it also comes from people they're putting their own projections of their own sexual difficulties onto the child and wanting to fix it. So, I was gay in my youth, therefore it's very important that all children are trained very carefully not to, encounter the difficulties I felt. Or a woman who's living in a way that, who has had, perhaps some traumatic experiences, and she wants that, to be avoided in the young children. And so they actually adultify the children to try and save their own childhood or their own difficulties. And this is not a sound, choice. And then I think we've got the much more sinister forces which are coming from, say, the government, as I said before, which would like to, cheapen their social services. They'd like to homogenize the culture. They'd like to iron out the problems. And then I think the commercial world, and that includes the international commercial world, and indeed almost at a kind of geopolitical level, there are forces that would like to homogenize that culture so that we don't take too much care of our nationalism, so that we don't mind our national borders, because we're all sharing this same utopian vision, which is a very useful homogenizing vision. And I think all of those things target children, women, mothers, the maternal relationship, the maternal instincts, and have been undermining them for decades, if not the best part of the last century, really.
So let's start then with the highest, the geopolitical. How would you, if you didn't have to talk about it for too long, how would you describe that as affecting the local level where the children and the mothers are?
Yeah, well, I suppose I can really only talk about the UK and my experience,
Yeah.
and I personally think Britain's experience is very important in all of this, because I think Britain was the blueprint for the nation state. It developed this concept and exported it through empire. And rightly or wrongly, wherever that exportation went, and whatever the empire did well or badly, it did develop this concept of international law and a way of observing the nation, and really, for itself, it prepared self-government. And the self-government that Britain prepared for itself, I think, is a really good thing. Whether we fail to extend that to others is another matter. But for ourselves, that's a blueprint worth keeping. And as I look at the international forces at the moment, I see an overriding of nation. I see internationalism that dreams of an open borders and open world, which is a lovely idea, but I think entirely unworkable. And I see Britain in particular being heavily targeted in this, because primarily it voted Brexit, which was a clear signal that the people wanted to assert self-governance in their own borders for their own nation. And I think an overriding of that has been achieved to some extent by using that deep inner feeling of gender as a way to break down borders, to break down the border to the individual, to break down the border of the family, to break down the border of the nation, which they're all connected. And so I actually think there is a cynical use of gender, because when you play with gender, and you can really undo a person. And so I think that's part, there is a cynical use going on, and that comes right down into the school, into the family, and we find, particularly pubescent children, who are kind of having that very difficult moment of becoming an adult and becoming a boy, from a boy or a girl to a man or woman. And they, that at that moment, that ideology, which I think was invented really to just destabilize and kind of the nation, actually seriously injures the child. And we are borderless to these ideas. The internet has rendered us borderless, and indeed our ideologies that we're learning is about being borderless, as and as a person and a nation. So it all goes together, and it comes right down and leaves the child, I guess, in a way, highly vulnerable.
I did a couple of podcasts on postmodernism because I thought I better understand it. And the first time we didn't have very good connection, so it was an audio. And so I was really listening, because I had to attend only to what he was saying. And at the end of it, after he explained postmodernism, I felt like my feet couldn't touch the floor. My hands couldn't grasp anything. I felt kind of sick to my stomach. It was a very, if you're not attached to anything, if there's nothing to hold you and you're not holding anything, that is the worst. It's no wonder people are confused. If what they're getting is a postmodern narrative in the schools, and then they're questioning. So then they start to question, and they're actually questioning whether they're girls or boys. I can see kids being susceptible to that because they already feel like nothing is worthwhile, and that what any direction that they go in is okay. It makes no difference where they go, so it doesn't matter. There's no values. There's no hierarchy of interest or value, and so I can see. So we're really putting our kids in a very difficult position. It's
Yeah. Well,
and if we don't listen, then it's even more difficult, because then there's no parents there lending their ear.
yeah, that's right. And people use the word gender dysphoria for this condition where you are
Dysphoria is
uncertain about
exactly
your
what I was
gender.
feeling.
Yeah, exactly. I think actually we'd be wiser to realize that this is cultural dysphoria that's being pressed upon us for all of us. You know, it's culturally dysphoric to be told that somebody that has arrived into the nation where your grandfather might have died fighting for it is an instant citizen of equal, access to the values of the nation. This is dysphoric. This is very, very confusing idea. And that's not to say that we can't join together. It's to say that an instant joining is not true. And these kind of asking people to believe things that are sort of self-evidently not true is this mechanism of dysphoria. And it goes through from gender right through to a concept of nation and who you are and what your history is. Britain in particular is being asked to believe an entirely false history because the biggest cultural generator is America. And so we're actually inheriting a history. It's very evident to the British parent in a way when you look at the history curriculum that a lot of it is coming from America. So we don't even have, a meaningful history for our own nation happening at the moment. And I actually think, I think you could describe America as fundamentally post-democratic at this moment. I think we have to kind of find ways, particularly in Britain, to preserve the instincts embedded in the British people for that self-government that I see being injured all over the West at the moment.
The common law, the common law that came from Britain to United States is what we're founded on. But now in Canada, the judiciary has thrown all of that out. There's no precedent anymore. It's all about feelings.
Well, we're working with a rights-based order, aren't we? And I think, see, this is very interesting because this comes right back to the founding of America. It comes back to the early political philosophers in Britain and the political philosophers in France as well. When, sort of late 1700s, early 1800s, where they're hammering out, modern kind of state and the way that people can live together and sort of eventually arrive sometime later at a kind of universal suffrage in Britain and the concept of, the nation state. And, I think there are two things that are so important there. One is that a great conservative political philosopher, Edmund Burke, really identified that rights were quite a dangerous way to go about governing. That
was smart.
They tend to be abstract. They tend to be abstract. They dream. They're only as good as well as the force that can guarantee them. And they also tend to proliferate. So people say, well, I have a right to life. And then you end up by the end of it, it's like, oh, well, I have a right to a garden, or I have a right for you to pay me to do something. People want more and more guarantees from the benefactor state that they ask in the form of rights. And so actually it's not as good, to my mind, as the self-government of legislating for common law. Having common law where you develop the law that tells you what's been decided in the past and you hone that, and also legislating through self-government whereby you vote based on the mandate that or rather you vote on the manifesto of your leaders, and then they are mandated to deliver it. And that self-governance is alive. That's live and active, and it's changing every generation. And if you vote out of your self-governance, so be it. But you take that risk because you stay alive, and then that, the old Churchillian phrase of the eternal vigilance of your self-government is about not falling off that very precious point of being free. And the fundamental in that is understanding that liberty is the first principle that we work to, and that equality is something that we cannot achieve at the same time as having liberty. We can't have the perfect equality at the same time. And so we have to work out how that we achieve that through our political decisions together. But we assume the liberty first, and thereafter we kind of make our social arrangements. And I think that we have lost that, and we are having the word equality replacing the concept of liberty.
So we should define liberty. What's the definition of liberty? Because I'm looking for responsibility. Like, where's the responsibility? And which of these words is the responsibility? Liberty.
Yeah, well, that's very difficult. I mean, obviously,
free within society, right? Free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. A state of being free within society. So with that, within society is a given, but you got to understand what within society means. It says, what's that?
Yeah, it's not an abstract freedom. It's the liberty from being having your liberty infringed, but it doesn't guarantee you the right to do anything you want.
Right. Yeah. It says oppressive restrictions, but oppressive restrictions, what are those? What makes it oppressive, right? What makes it oppressive?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for example, I think the early British Constitution prohibited, say, the king to come down and arbitrarily fine people, to gather, fines, or to jail someone without, for example, being proven guilty. So innocence until proven guilty is that fundamental part of that liberty.
Right.
You can't arbitrarily chuck people in jail because you just don't want, you don't want them
because
on the street.
It's easier than chucking the one that's scary in jail. Which seems to be kind of happening too, when two. So we're doing a lot of arguing on the street these days, and then the police come and they have to see what they can do to break it up. And I've been told that the police take away whichever person they can find is easiest to take away without causing more violence. And so and so that ends up being
about justice. It's not about justice.
It shouldn't stop. Right? It shouldn't stop there, though. So it seems to be stopping there. So they're not taking
the other thing we've got is we've got a weaponizing of victimhood, and so what's perhaps happened here is that in classical liberalism, the concept of harm is a really important idea. So that's really where the state had the right to come in and halt your liberty. We all agree by voting that murdering someone is wrong. If somebody comes in to murder someone, we all agree the state may step in and put that person in jail and prevent, if they can, or punish them after the event. And this is an obstruction of liberty we agree to because the harm has happened. Because harm justifies the intervention and the authority of the state, what I think has happened is that there has been a hijacking of the concept of harm, and people have brought it to something that is not material but psychological. Now that we have a psychological harm, anyone can claim it, and therefore they can trigger the authoritarian response that they want. And so that I think is a huge shift that's happened, is that we've moved from provable material harms to unprovable psychological harms as the basis for justice. And it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
We put that, it doesn't work. Because actually there's more than that. those harms have been hinged to identities. So now we only have the concept that the harm can only happen to a certain identity. So a perfect example was that in my daughter's school, she was in the 17% white minority, and she was taught a lesson that said, because of the colour of her white skin, she could not experience racism, and nothing could harm her racially, even in a 17% minority in this case. And of course, again, this is based on the idea that one party controls what harm means, and that harm is psychological and it only works in certain ways. And we've departed from universal justice right there. So yeah, it's a huge depletion, or sort of degradation rather, of the basis of classical liberalism, which is essential, I think, in modern states.
Yeah, well, we haven't talked about the responsibility that someone else has to take on for if someone is claiming that they have a right to something, then that means they have to actually find somebody who's willing to take on the responsibility of allowing that right to be instantiated. And so the rights of having harm done psychologically, that's virtually impossible to find someone who can have enough evidence to take the responsibility for that. So the schools seem to be taking responsibility for that. So they're taking responsibility for the kids claiming that they need these rights. So the government is taking responsibility because the school is the government. Yeah. So the government's taking responsibility for these rights that are being, and they can't take responsibility because this is something from society that society has to agree upon.
Yeah, it's our job. It's our job to take care of ourselves and each other. That's our job. That is liberty. The job of taking care of yourself and each other. And if you assume that is a given for you in a right, then someone else has to do it, and someone else has to be the authority that insists it's done. And that means you are living not in liberty, but under a governance structure, an authority, a dictatorship even. It's a really dangerous inversion, actually. And I think, there are some rights with a small r, let's say, that can be arranged between the state and its people, but they should be very pragmatic exchanges. It's to say I have a right to express my sexuality, for example, is not a pragmatic exchange. And it's not actually very few, even the right to free speech, which is a very attractive idea, is of course not possible in its fullest sense. I cannot defame someone, libel someone. I can't lie about someone so that it ruins their livelihood. I can't incite violence and say, go kill that person. We rightly say that's a limit to your free speech. So even in that wonderful good of having the right to free speech, we have to have limits and responsibilities. So really I think the best way to talk about things, and I found this very helpful in all of the campaigning I've done with the schools, is to talk about interests, not rights. I have an interest to speak as freely as I can, but no perfect right to do so. And I'm going to have to find out what somebody else's interest is to perhaps not have a secret told about them that I could tell that hurts them. Limitations. And those interests, finding our sort of shared interests and solving our conflicting interests is what common law does so well. And what good government does well, and what self-government does.
Yeah, because it's through negotiation, through proper negotiation, complete negotiation, that you find a place of ease. But that ease can't be found until you negotiate. So you can't insist on your interest. You have to discuss your interest with someone else and find where you can flow easily with the other person's understanding, and then that you have something that may work more broadly even.
Yeah, and that's exactly what social justice theory and advocates aren't doing.
Right.
They are sure about their own righteousness. They feel that they need other people to agree with it. They're not prepared to wait to make that argument and win that argument fair and square. They're not interested in justice. They would like to force the other person to accept that view, I think, in something that is really quite totalitarian. And to do that, they are prepared to claim their own harms such that other people have to be authoritarianly stopped from proceeding. And so we get this one-way valve, and that's exactly the mechanism that I've observed in the schools over and over again. That and it's come to the point where even conscientious teachers here in the UK, who have, for example, wanted to not to use the opposite gender pronouns for a child who's transitioned. They wanted to actually observe the fact that the girl is still a girl, and they have been sacked. They've been sacked. There has been, the unions who are normally extremely defensive of their teachers' positions and interests have said nothing. They've let them go. People's entire livelihoods have been cancelled for not having the right opinion within the education system. And that's, now common across the West. So that's intolerance. It's the end of a shared democracy, as far as I can tell. And it shocks me that so many people don't seem to realize how late the hour is.
Do you think that the schools are put together enough for kids to still go?
Are they good enough?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's there is I know there's a big homeschooling movement in America, and there is a growing one here. There is an argument that the entire experiment of the last, say, century and a bit and a half of collective schooling is sort of running out of steam, and we need some kind of radical renewal or re-understanding of what's going on here. Certain people who saw early state schooling actually said, this will eventually go wrong because fundamentally the state will become the parent if we go on like this. And an element of that is happening.
Yeah, it sure is.
I'm not a huge homeschooling fan in the sense that I think there is great things to come from a community, great things to come from an institution, sharing between other children, having other adults come in who are experts with their knowledge. That's a great ideal, and I think education can be wonderful in that way, and schools can be wonderful, but they need to have the element of the natural family embedded in there as the whole purpose, and that seems to have been ironed out. So if we can return to that, I prefer schools than homeschooling only. I think maybe it would be impossible, especially for harder up people, to achieve homeschooling in a way that keeps them up, that they can keep up with everyone else.
Now, that's a good point. The question I have is that the families now have also been, I would say, disassembled, so that families aren't what they were. They used to be a man and a woman who were married and they had children. It used to be that there were grandparents around and aunts and uncles and many siblings. So, it's changed a lot. It went down to the nuclear family, which wasn't very many children, and it didn't have the aunts and uncles and grandparents around. So that was the first change. And that was people moving, but staying married. But now we're to the point where there's many single parents that are raising their children. And also there's different ways of people to be married, because that's become legal too, is for you don't have to just be married between a man and a woman. You can be married man, and a woman together. So now that, and if there's still two, I mean, there's still, and if those people are embedded in a community, maybe you can still cobble together a family based on that. But now people are working. So not only is the family disrupted, but everybody's working, and we've left our kids to the state, and we're in a crisis moment I don't think that our kids can stay there. And it's possible that the schools are done because the people who are teaching this, the children, have been raised in the university, and the universities are woke and teaching postmodern ideas, or even postmodern ideas. And so I don't know. This is a you talk to some people and they say, I don't know. I think that we're in like an end of times kind of scenario, and to find our way back would have to be so much backpedaling. But that's everyone's story, really, individually, is to backpedal. Eventually, when you find out that you've been running the show all along and you've been misguided, and when you realize that it's not up to you, that it's up to what is transcendent to make all the decisions, there's a lot of backpedaling that goes. But now this is a societal time for backpedaling, and wow.
Yes, I think we've been deconstructing for too long. I started out as a knitwear designer, and part of knitting well is undoing an enormous amount of the knitting to start off in another where you've lost your stitches, and having the patience to do that, and the rigor, to do that. And yes, a society needs to have that about it. I think there are benefits sometimes to deconstruction, and I understand why, if you look at the kind of pre-Christian past, there were, or kind of multi in faiths that have many gods, there's often a kind of veneration of something destructive going on, But if you have that as your main goal and you do it over and over for decades, that you undo, deconstruct, take down, it's so much harder to create than to destroy. You will not keep up, and we haven't kept up. And so, yes, we've asked interesting questions and had kind of, emancipated and made changes, and we failed to reconstruct properly, in my view. And so, yeah, we have to change, I think, the story, change our sense of romance. I think we need to perhaps stop romancing utopian freedom in quite the way we have been. Have new narratives on that.
Utopian freedom, yes. And are you thinking of that? Are you thinking of that through feminism? And because we've had a certain narrative through feminism that needs to change, and it's been one of freedom, I believe. And so,
yeah, I mean,
it's not all about freedom. It can't be. It just can't be, because it's too one-sided.
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, freedom from what? I mean, freedom to do what? I mean, freedom is kind of, it doesn't prevent you making mistakes. I mean, it's as simple as that. It doesn't prevent you making mistakes. There's still an awful lot to decide once you have got freedom. So, it's fairly immaterial to even consider freedom as a good. I consider having liberty from my state a good start, but then what I do with that is all to play for. And we're not teaching children very well. We no longer dare to teach children a given good path, because we have learned that all paths are relative, and so we provide them with nothing but a sense of freedom, maybe, and then a lot of safety.
And a lot of safety,
training.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, it's not, as I say, it's not a good enough philosophy. I think we have to change that.
So your appeal is coming up, and I guess you're going to further your arguments for this appeal. Is that what you're planning?
Yeah.
Is that you have new evidence that you can bring to bear?
Well, hopefully. I mean, the crucial question is whether or not commercial interests trump the parents' interests. That's what it came down to in the end. And so far, everyone has agreed that the commercial interest to keep the lesson plan secret trumps the parents' right to have access to it. I just think, my only real consistent argument is that that's unethical. And I'm going to keep making that argument, that it's unethical to put commercial needs before the relationship between a parent and a child, because I cannot manage the relationship between me and my daughter if I cannot see what is being shown to her and taught to her by other influential people. And even if I get to see it under what they would like to arrange, which is a sort of non-disclosure type arrangement where, okay, fair enough, the parent should see, we have got that. We will let you come into the school, take a look at the materials, but you can't have a copy and you can't display it to anyone else. Well, what that prevents is it prevents me talking about it in society. It prevents me going to the press. It prevents me having a proper complaint procedure, which is actually something that should function in our state system. And it prevents me even going to our national regulator, which is called Ofsted. And I could, if without a copy, I'm powerless. And it's just so interesting to me that all that the state and all that the courts imagined that I as a parent wanted was just to be told, okay, we're giving you a quick look at this lesson plan. You've seen it now. There was no imagination on the part of any of the people making these decisions that I might want to act, that I might have agency, that I might have all sorts of ideas that I need to exert now that I've seen what you've taught my children. And it just shows me that we are being understood as passive citizens, not as active parents. And we will just take what our children are taught. And if it's got a big problem with it, well, you can't do anything about it. It's not up to you anymore. So that's the thing I'm arguing to overturn, that that the public interest is too important for safeguarding, for democracy, and we need to be active citizens. So that's the next argument to make. And we'll see what the next judge says.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, depending on where he was educated or she was educated.
Well, yeah. So we've got a huge problem with the judiciary. So our judiciary and our legal class have all been taught that about the theory of intersectionality. They're bringing that, what I would say, injustice into the it's fundamentally a prejudice. That's what the theory of intersectionality delivers, is a prejudice about your hardships and your identity, based on your identity. And actually that's been taught to all of our lawyers, just as it's been taught to all of our teachers, just as it's been taught to all of our civil servants, and certainly through the universities. So that's a real problem, because
my hardships compared to your hardships. I can't say that my hardships are worse than your hardships. Is that what intersectionality
is? Well, the specific theory, I think the originator was a lady called Kimberly Crenshaw in the US, and she was a lawyer. And she identified that some workers at, I think it was a Ford factory, a black female worker was not allowed a job there. And she identified that because she was black, so the women did work there, but in the secretarial office. And because she was black, she was denied a place amongst what was a white office. And then there were some black workers at Ford, but they were working as the engineers amongst the men. And because she was a woman, she wasn't allowed to be amongst the men. And so this gave the idea that this woman had an intersection of identities that was doubly unfair to her. I've always wondered, did she apply to be both a female engineer and a secretary? I suspect she only applied for one job and was only discriminated against once. But anyway, the point is that she has been said to be discriminated against twice, and it doubles her troubles. And now we can start looking at everyone else with regard to their intersectional status. And we have a very clear hierarchy with white straight men at the top who have the minimum amount of obstruction and privilege, and then somebody who is black or disabled or gay or has identities that are minority status or sometimes persecuted. They're at the bottom, and this is it may have a little bit of truth in, and in some societies where it's badly ordered, it may have a lot of truth in. Mm-hmm. But in the West, where we have good open justice most of the time, we certainly have enjoyed that till recently. This is not the absolute determining factor, this intersectionality idea.
Plus, they can't say that that's why she didn't get the job either.
Well, yes, I don't know what the outcome of her court case was and whether discrimination was found or not.
Right.
Perhaps it was, but perhaps it wasn't. But certainly to prejudicially apply that idea to everyone just as they sit here and to say that, somebody, for example, if you're white, you can't experience racism, for example. These ideas are just, they're foolish. And they're also, they have a kind of socialist history in that they were designed partly to sort of give you class consciousness so that you could be angry with your position and so you could rise up and overturn it. So it's a kind of revolutionary incentive to think in these terms.
Yeah.
And that undermines your agency, which
your
is,
merit.
I think,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, yes,
mm-hmm.
your merit, your agency, everything you've achieved, it gets in the way of all of the good things. And
mm-hmm.
I reject that theory heartily. It's not to suggest that someone mustn't let you know when unfairness has come to them. And it's mm-hmm. not that we shouldn't guess that maybe unfairness falls on certain groups more commonly. We should guess that and worry about it. But we all have, all the Western nations have anti-discrimination law. We're well prepared for that.
Right.
And so we need to get past that to a much better concept of the way we treat each other, And
mm-hmm.
certainly our judiciary needs to be free of that prejudice. Otherwise, it won't make good decisions.
I just want to talk a little bit about the Miriam Cates, who commissioned a report about the implementation of the British relationships and sex education curriculum. So does that have something to do with your first case? Yes?
Yes. Well, my case is especially about transparency. Mm-hmm. But the reason we need transparency is because there are many parents who want to take some action about what is extreme RSE. The kind of thing we're talking about is 12-year-olds taught about anal sex. We're talking about children who are being in primary school being told that they may well have been they could be born in the wrong body. Mm-hmm. We're talking about charities and companies which signpost children to ethical pornography as the right way to navigate the internet, and mm-hmm. so on. Incredibly controversial matters which upset many parents' consciences and safeguarding. And that's a free-for-all at the moment. We've got, because the government basically created a new guidance that opened up and took us away from what was our prior arrangement, which was basically teaching the biology of reproduction. Mm-hmm. I think there were some valid arguments to say, well, maybe there are some other things to learn about not being abused or harassing people. Maybe we need to learn a little bit more about the age of consent and what that means. And, we could definitely have expanded that curriculum sensibly. Mm-hmm. But the people who argued for that had a very different idea in mind. They wanted to create a whole different political view, again, based on sexual freedom fundamentally, and also putting a lot of work into managing potential prejudice against homosexuality. And so that was a big driver as well to take control of this curriculum. And it was an unwisely worded document, and it's been handed into academics who know exactly how to import all of the most radical international thinking on this. There's a lot of pressure from the UN through its UNICEF and UNESCO, which are bringing all sorts of schemes and to the kids, and consequently, that's why Miriam Cates stood up and said, "Enough is enough. We've seen enough evidence now. We've gathered the evidence," and I contributed to her report to actually make the case that there is a big problem.
Mm-hmm. So this is in the curriculum to be taught to kids. You said 12, at about 12?
Well, it's all the way through. I mean, in terms of gender ideology, that starts in nursery sometimes.
Nursery school.
Certainly in the primary school.
Yeah.
So for gender ideology, that's pretty much all the way through. In terms of what you would call sex positivity, which is this sort of kind of idea of deconstructing sexual morality and kind of that is probably a secondary school from about 11, 12 plus, that kind of teaching is most common. But it's all profoundly foolish. So much of it is delivered as well by young women, and then who are, I think, they haven't had kids yet.
Right.
They're young. They probably feel quite sexy. They're young. They're kind of. It's all great for them. They don't remember their childhood right at the moment.
It's time to have a baby. It's time to have a baby and put that in the right part. Yeah.
I think it probably is, and I think that for them, they're looking to do something good in the world, and so teaching other people's children to be enlightened and open-minded as they are. Seems to be their satisfaction.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like it's a possibility, because women aren't having kids young anymore, but they're definitely ready, biologically ready to have babies. So they're going to put that feeling, they're going to put it somewhere. And if they're going to be teaching that in school, then that's not the right place for it. It's just not.
No, it's their own values, their own experience, their own vision, and actually we have a really good law in the UK, which is in the Education Act, and it prohibits the indoctrination of children, the political indoctrination of children, and it's very clear that where you introduce one strong political idea or ethical idea, you really need to introduce the opposite and balance this. You need to be able to have a full discussion, and you mustn't be caught promoting these ideas. And for some reason, that has been completely bypassed. I mean, it's totally overridden. And the government is not enforcing it. The government, it's hard for me I find it very hard to understand what is holding our government back from actually delivering on what they know very well is the British people's will.
Yeah.
Who knows? Is it our debt? Is it their relationships abroad? Is it corruption? Is it the fact that they're stuck in a Westminster bubble with a lot of very liberally minded people? I don't know, but it's disturbing that they are unable to deliver.
Mm-hmm. And so, what do you think can be done about that? Is this a groundswell that has to happen?
Yeah, and it is happening. I mean, there's loads of action from Grassroots, which is great. I have met so many brilliant parents and activists and people working on this who are fantastic, and that's growing. And there's one particular thing I really want to happen, which is I want our country, and I think any Western country should legislate to say that whatever a child is taught in a school should be published. The resources that are used, should be published.
Mm-hmm. So you can so you can go to a curriculum, you can go to a school, you can look at their curriculum, and you can see it before you send your child there. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be like that. It could be like that, although people complain that this burdens the school unnecessarily with having to show everything they do. It could just be that the school would say, well, we teach this textbook from this syllabus, and it's actually the textbook makers and the PDF makers who have to do the burden of publishing what they do. And that would historically have always been the case. We'd have known which geography, history,
Right.
The trouble is that the new subjects that have been introduced, it began in America, came over here, these new subjects of social emotional learning, as they're called, and in our country, PSHE, so personal, social, health, economic education. These subjects don't have a textbook. They're not published. These are the areas that are kept secret, kept behind commercial secrecy clauses, are delivered by external providers who come in and say something, then leave, and we can't get at what it was. And that whole new world, and also, of course, the internet permits, PDF downloads that are not shown to us. So it's those materials that need to be published. The school doesn't have to overwork to do that. They should just be able to say, well, do you know what? I use this company, and if you want to buy their book, it's $6.59 on Amazon. You can buy their book, and you can buy this. You can go, because once all of the public can access something, we can all talk about it.
That's right.
We can, yeah. So I think that's one fundamental thing. But another would be, the serious stuff is to understand that the UN is no longer a safe arbiter of rights. It's no longer a safe arbiter of equality. We need to actually be withdrawing from those international relations that are forcing upon our democracies things that the people don't want to mandate. And that's a much bigger issue.
Yeah, but worth mentioning nonetheless, because we have to have this in mind.
Yeah.
And find that if this is where we are focused, if this is something that annoys us, then it's something for us to research and become more confident in, and to speak about it and put it into action. Yeah.
Yeah, and then hopefully, get the chance to vote on it. That's what we. That's why we need it raised high. That actually we're not mandating what's happening, and that there is not a time in history where, if the people's consent is missing, that there isn't violence and serious trouble. And I think we're partway there.
It looks that way.
Which is extraordinary, given the wonderful situation we had in the West previously.
Yeah, and all the opportunities we have now too. To devolve into warring sides is it negates everything that we've been working for. So it's time to become mindful of the decisions we're making, and of the allegiance that we're serving, and everything, to try to pull ourselves back from, if we're finding ourselves in a place that is every day causing us trouble, then it's time to pull yourself back and take a good hard look and see what it is that you're paying attention to, and where you're getting your information from, and who you're getting your information from, and what the consequences of that information is. Just education, right? Educate ourselves. And it looks to me like I've met so many people now who are doing something other than what they were doing. So, and I know that those are the people who are speaking out, but those are the people who are deciding to take action. And that action these days is not where you thought it was going to be. And
absolutely.
That's okay.
Yeah. And I think in terms of educating yourself, as you said, and looking for a broad reading, and getting your information in, there's something else that I think people have to start doing, which is to just actually listen to their instincts. To actually go back to saying, no, hold on a minute. I fundamentally know that that's wrong. I fundamentally know that my colleague who was cancelled, who was pushed out, I know that that's wrong. I don't even know why. I just know that the method by which this person was treated was not okay. And actually, I just have to go for the treatment. I just have to look at the method, the treatment, the way people are behaving, and say when this is not okay. Because I think the overriding of instinct and the overriding of what we see with our eyes is something that's been achieved by this particular, today's culture. And so that's one of the things, is just stand still and look inside and kind of actually realize when all of your alarms have gone off about maltreatment. And I think that's something that everyone could do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you very much. I think that we've
No,
talked
thank you very much.
for a good amount of time, and I think we covered lots of material, and so I hope that everyone can find something here that they can take home and talk about with each other, and
That would
think
be
about our
great.
children and our grandchildren.
For sure, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and good luck with your case.
Thank you very much, Tammy. Yes, thanks.